Okay. Still seeing this lag, and I'm just watching myself have a glare. Um, and yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Is this going to go live? Watching myself. Okay. It's like a 10 to 15-second delay, you guys. So when I'm done here, I'm just going to have a long stare into the camera until I'm confident that you've seen all that I have to say, which, maybe something, maybe nothing. It is once again the debrief. I think some people watch this video later. Not everybody watches it live. Uh, but welcome to those of you three who are on board at the moment. This week we had Griffin Newman on the show. And like I've been saying in the newsletter and on the show, I think he has a tremendous amount of self awareness and realistic self awareness. It's easy when you deal with depression and anxiety to have self awareness. It's easy to have maybe a little too much self awareness, and and beat yourself up or distort what's going on. The cognitive distortions, the catastrophizing, the all or nothing thinking, the black and white thinking, the just the ways that you look at the world that aren't realistic. That depression or trauma, anxiety, a lot of those things can cause you to see in that warped way. But Griffin, I think, is pretty realistic about it. If not in the moment, then in retrospect. I think that's a thing that we can all work on, often with therapists, but maybe not necessarily. Like if you're in a pickle, if you're feeling bad, if you're having a down cycle, to take a moment and say, okay, realistically, what's going on here? What's informing this? What's affecting this? What's triggering this? And how do I usually respond to this? Is this consistent with that? And not to get lost in your own thoughts, but to kind of know how your car works, to know how things operate. I was really pleased that Griffin was able to get into the stuff about Woody Allen in such a thoughtful way, in such a way that he explained why he did the Woody Allen movie and then why he feels like he shouldn't have done the Woody Allen movie. He was not overly hard on himself, but he was pretty brutally honest with himself that yes, he believed Dylan Farrow, but also as a New Yorker and an actor, it's a Woody Allen movie, and so he thought he could kind of straddle the line, but then found that he couldn't. I thought that was really interesting. Watch The Tick also. It is ultimately a series about mental illness. There's 2 seasons of it, I believe, on Amazon. It's the third incarnation of The Tick. The first was as a cartoon series in the 90s, which I loved. And then they tried to bring it to broadcast television, like ABC or something, with Patrick Warburton from Seinfeld in the lead and changed some of the characters' names. And then this is the third version with Peter Serafinowicz, who you've seen in a million things, whether or not you realize it, as the Tick, and then Griffin really as the lead. This one kind of positioned Arthur as the lead, where a lot like Griffin himself, he has mental obstacles. He has nervous conditions. He's got blocks that he has to manage around rather than be able to remove. It's a really interesting take on it. I watched it because I just love the characters, and I love the previous series, and so it was, I was really fascinated. I found that I couldn't. It wasn't as funny all the time because it really got inside the characters and why they did the things that they did. It was still pretty funny a lot of the time, especially the boat. There's a talking boat, and just go watch that. I mean, what else are you gonna do? Come on. Um, so yeah, so that was the Griffin Newman episode. Next week we have an episode about how to talk to people who you're worried about with mental illness. And it didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to. And I talk about that in the show. I set out to find out like what you should say. Like, okay, so you're worried about someone, what should you say? And I had two different therapists, one's still practicing, one's not, from different parts of the country, different walks of life. And they both kind of brought it around to, well, before you say something to this person, let's figure out what you know about this person, right? And let's figure out what's important to them. Let's figure out what your intent is in talking to the person. Do you intend to talk about them and cure them in the process? Do you intend to persuade them in some way? Like, how to avoid wrecking yourself by checking yourself, basically. And it was an exploration of language in that regard, too. But a lot of it really came down to the kind of thinking of why you want to know. It's a classic therapist thing. It's like, okay, I want to go do this thing. And instead of the therapist telling you how to go do the thing, the therapist is saying, that sounds important to you. Let's explore that. Let's explore why that's so important to you, which can be very healthy, very useful, and sometimes somewhat aggravating when it comes to therapists. So yeah, it's an exploration of that. Then we have Lisa Hanawalt coming up, who created Tuca and Birdie, the cartoon, and she was also one of the people on BoJack Horseman. So really interesting stuff. It's awfully nice being on the Maximum Fun Network because there's some really great people who you can book a little easier than if they weren't colleagues. So we have Lisa Hanawalt, who does a show. I interviewed Jackie Cation, the comedian, yesterday. She's going to be on the show. Janet Varney from the JV Club is going to be on the show. So it's I'm glad to be working with a place where you could just sort of walk around the office and book people. There is no office. I'm in St. Paul. None of these people are. There is no water cooler to speak of, unless you consider like the Rocky Mountains. But we're not going to meet up there. So that's all on the horizon. I also wanted to mention something really cool that's kind of emerged on the Preshies site, on the Facebook group Preshies, which I think a lot of you probably already go to. There had been talk for a while that people wanted an episode about sex, about specifically about how to manage that thorny issue when you're dealing with something like trauma or depression or something that is weighing you down, pulling you down. Because it doesn't get talked about a lot. It's sort of like a double whammy of things that don't get talked about because it's mental health and it's sex. And yes, there are plenty of places online where sex is discussed. But people wanted to talk about it in the scope of mental health and as an advice thing on like how to try to manage this, but also I think as an acknowledgement to here's another thing depression does. Here's another thing that anxiety does. Here's another thing that it messes with. And to kind of speak that out loud. So we are working on that show. We even have a sponsor who has come along and surprised me that is within that same category in a tasteful, perfectly tasteful way. And so that is coming this fall. And so be on the lookout for the sex episode. I think it's just, plus also, if you call something the sex episode, I think you're going to get some downloads. Speaking of downloads, we've been getting a nice bump in downloads from the Joel Kim Booster episode that we dropped into the Hilarious World of Depression feed last week. I think I haven't talked to you since then, but American Public Media finally came through and dropped an episode of our show with a new introduction by me into the feed for the old show. I guess a lot of those old episodes of Hilarious World still do a lot of traffic. So good for them. but hopefully now people will switch over and subscribe to Depresh Mode. I have been seeing also a lot of people subscribing to the newsletter, a real uptick in the Substack newsletter. So that's been great to see. And I think that must be driven by the APM feed. So hooray for that. Speaking of, I'm all about transitions and segues. Speaking of the APM feed, and APM, I guess, in general, Wits is coming back. The show I used to host, comedy and music show at the Fitzgerald Theater. I hosted that as an employee of APM in the theater, the Fitzgerald, owned by APM. Well, I'm no longer an employee, and they no longer own that theater. The First Avenue company does. But we are working something out where we can make new shows without APM's involvement, and a whole business thing is coming together, which I'm really excited about. Doing, a professional full-time number of shows a year with Wits was very, very hard to sustain in all sorts of ways. But doing some shows, I think, is very sustainable. So, look up Wits tickets or Fitzgerald Theater and get information on that if you're in the Twin Cities or if you're in driving distance or flying distance. And aren't we all in flying distance? So that's coming up in the fall, October 1st. And guests are already booked, but we're not yet saying who they are. We're going to see if we can avoid saying who they are and let everybody be surprised when Prince ghost arrives. I was just trying to think of the most famous person I could think of as a joke, but I said Prince, but he's dead, and so I said Prince ghost. I'm so sorry. Improv. I'm no good at the improv. Everything I'm writing right now, I'm reading off a script, including where I said, no, that's not true. I am improvising this, but you get my point. So that's about it for now. I did, last week I got to go up to a cabin in the far north of Minnesota, and it had no internet access, but it did have Lake Superior and a sauna. Did I go in the sauna and then jump in Lake Superior? No, because apparently I'm not from Finland. I'm from Norway, but I'm not from Finland. So we'll meet up again soon, and we'll talk to you then. Listen to the show, subscribe to the Substack newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, write reviews, hit 5 stars. We're averaging 5 stars, which is amazing. It's very difficult to do. And become a member of the show if you haven't already. MaximumFun.org/join. Follow, they'll tell you what to do. It's easy. All right. Now I'm going to end the stream and I'm going to stare into the camera until I know I'm caught up. All right. Bye.